I have to start again. Oh, yes. So, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Piccolo for his invitation. Secondly, I want to say that my talk is addressed to non-economists mainly. This first slide shows the existence still up to date of two alternative and rival paradigms in economic theory, with the specification that the neoclassical paradigm is the core of mainstream economics, and it is unfortunately, to my view, the dominant one. But before that, I just put, you see, three representative economists in one and the other, just to put attention about the dates. You see, at the end of the 19th century, we had the classical paradigm in which the main features were the recognition of social classes, income distribution seen as mainly social relations, and the existence of a social surplus in their model, the recognition of inherent conflict, and the presence, of course, of a market, but playing a subsidiary role. Whereas in a neoclassical paradigm, we have nothing at all from the classical one. The neoclassical paradigm at the end of the 19th century changed completely the vision of the society. There is not even a word in common. Even if we have some word in common, like, for instance, a wage, the meaning of this word is completely different from the classical one. I put some inverted comma in about the word neoclassical because I dislike this name. Because as if somebody would call Einstein a new Newtonian, as Schumpeter said. Marginalists, it would be better, far better. But the point is that mainstream economics sometimes eluded the marginalist analytical structure. And so neoclassical is the most common word used to indicate this kind of market-centered paradigm, in which you see there are no significant social classes, but individuals. Income distribution is seen as a sort of reflection of market relations. There is the idea of harmony, they call the equilibrium. And above all, a market plays a crucial role, because by making recourse to the principle of scarcity of the commodities, they activated the mechanism of supply and demand of the commodities, by which everything, you see, goes smooth. How can I? Sorry. Well, just very briefly, money has been seen, this is quite obvious, this slide, money was seen as a unit of account, a sort of value, and a medium of exchange. I put in this particular sequence because the most important one, as we can see, is money as a unit of account. Secondly, as a store of value, and then as a medium of exchange. There is a traditional, but I think that now is out of the scene, the representation of a monetary economy as some, you see, a system following a budget economy, as if a monetary economy were inserted in a sort of technological development, whereas it was money must be inserted in a social and political development, as we can see in the sequel. So the representation that barter is old, then we have monetary economy, and then a credit economy is an incorrect transition, you see, from one state of the other, from one state to the other. Lastly, when we say money, of course, the title of the panel 6, money, is obviously correct. Is very shorthand word just to say what is the topic of the talk. But money is like a black hole, is something which is magnetic, is an entity which assumes a chameleonic structure. It's extremely difficult to define, to quantify, if necessary. So I prefer to speak of monetary system, because money, whatever it be, is inserted in a social system, in a historical system, in a political system. So we have to study money historically determined. Now, I want to show the definition of money and monetary economy, and monetary system, sorry, just by quoting two economists, Keynes and Zraff, because I think that they gave, in a very concise way, gave between the 20s and the 30s the best definitions of what is money and, above all, what is a monetary economy. The first quotation is from Keynes. I put the dates just to make the temporal reference. Keynes was very fond of ancient economists. And to the best of my knowledge, one of the first writing by Keynes is a review in 1944. 1914 is a review, a beautiful review. But then he left some unpublished papers between the 20s and the 26th of last century, which are really very extremely interesting. So that is one of the definitions of Keynes about money. For most important social and economic purposes, what matters is the money of account. For is the money of account which is the subject of contract and of customary obligation. The introduction of money in terms of which loans and contracts with a time element can be expressed is what really changes the economic status of a primitive society. The second quotation is the following we can find in the Treatise on Money, which is the very important book written by Keynes before his monumental, the general theory of employment, interest, and money. So in 1930, Keynes wrote, "A money of account, namely, that in which debts and prices and general purchasing power are expressed, is the primary concept of a theory of money. Then a money of account comes into existence along with debts, which are contracts for deferred payments, and pricelets, which are offers of contracts for sale or purchase. Such debts and pricelets, whether they are recorded by word of mouth, or by book entry, or baked bricks, or paper documents, can only be expressed in terms of a money of account." Thus, he concludes, the age of money has succeeded to the age of butter as soon as man had adopted a money of account. Then, and this is the last quote, I'm sorry for the length, this is the third quotation from Zraff, in a very dense review of one of the most, sorry to say, Taliban economist, von Hayek. It's a harsh critique of von Hayek's book, Prices and Production. Zraff wrote in 1932, published in the Economic Journal, and we find a very concise, but in other ways, very extensive definition of money, which I took here just for what I'm saying in the sequel. Zraff wrote, money is referring to von Hayek, for which money is just a medium of exchange, that's all. Money is not only the medium of exchange, but also a store of value and a standard in terms of which debts and other legal obligations, habits, opinions, conventions, in short, all kinds of relations between men are more or less rigidly fixed. As a result, when the price of one or more commodities changes, this relation changes in terms of such commodities. While if they had been fixed in commodities in some specified way, they would have changed differently or not at all. So this is a more precise, very concise, but at the same time incisive definition of what is money. Now, the definition by Keynes and by Zraff land us on straight away on the relation between debtors and creditors. That is the first micro relation between men, a relationship which is from the very beginning intuitively unequal, in which relation there is a seed of power, a seed of conflict in a microcosm, which will be enlarged afterwards in time. So, from the conceptual point of view, the relation between debtors and creditors involves a promise of payment, which means exactly, at least, a contract which is split in time, which means the existence of risk and uncertainty, two different concepts relative to time. And then trust. Trust is a very important good, but unfortunately, trust is not a good which is easily bought in any market, because we had to have recourse to an infinite sequence to have the certainty to have trust, 100%. But trust is there. So that is the promise of payment connotations. The second features of the relationship between debtors and creditors is the existence, this is far more difficult, the existence, conceptually speaking, of an asset which we can define liquid in the sense that I have to explain presently. the existence of a liquid asset. Now, liquid asset, so the notion of liquidity, which came into being, especially in the general theory of employment by Keynes in 1936, was employed by Keynes for other reasons, for reason which it is not patent here, but it remains the more general definition of liquidity, which is extremely important from ancient time, I dare say, up to the present. Now, Keynes gave, I took this quotation from Keynes, from an article written by Keynes 1 year after the general theory, in which he explained the better something which was not perhaps clear in the general theory. And the notion of liquid asset is given from this quotation, which I read with you. Our desire to hold money as a store of wealth is a barometer of the degree of our distrust of our calculations and conventions concerning the future. Even though this feeling about money is itself conventional and instinctive, it operates, so to speak, at a deeper level of our motivation. The possession of actual money lulls our disquietude, and the premium which we require to make us part with money is the measure of the degree of our disquietude. So we can apply, so to speak, this notion of liquidity. First of all, we can say that from this quotation, but not only from this quotation, but just thinking about the notion of liquidity, we say that we can say safely that money is useful not only when it is spent so as a medium of exchange, but money is useful even when it is not spent. But it has a cost, which is not easily calculable. But nonetheless, the notion of liquidity is crucial. So let us take, just as a sort of mental exercise, two alternative models of society in a very crude, rough description. One is a tribe-based society and a feudal society. They have something in common. For example, a collective security. Think of a farmer, a land with agricultural products. You see, a tribe-based society and a feudal society, there is implicitly a sort of insurance against the damages, failures. So it's quite easy for one individual member of the tribe or in a feudal society to have some insurance of his or her own existence. Whereas when we go to a private, individually based society, so no tribe, no feudal state, so every man had to, you see, makes hand meat by himself. There is the necessity of producing a surplus. Be careful that in this sense, a surplus is not a social concept here. I use the surplus in a very loose way. Something, you see, above the mere subsistence, just for future failures or uncertainty or risk of failures. So this surplus is a sort of insurance contract. Materially speaking, it can provide a sort of security stock. Now, it is impossible that each and every individual can build up a security stock by himself. So in such a circumstance, the recourse to borrowing and lending is very probable, and I dare say might be necessary, with the consequence, of course, of leaving the creditor, if he lends something to somebody else, leaving the creditor parting with liquidity, parting with some stock for his own uncertainty about the future. So he's demanding to the debtor a liquidity premium, which we can imagine as numerically expressed by a rate of interest. Now, although it seems a sort of catastrophe point, this allows me to pass straight away to one of the most celebrated items in monetary theory, the quantity theory of money. It's a very old-fashioned expression written here. M stands for money, V for velocity of circulation, P an average of prices of the commodities, NT an index for transactions, a sort of bundle, a macro bundle of commodities. The expression as such, of course, is a tautology, because on the left side, left-hand side, is just a flow of monetary payment, and on the right-hand side, the flow in value of goods and services produced in a certain span of time. But this expression, in a very succinct way, concise way, has been transformed into a genuine equation. And that's a change the interpretation quite fundamentally. Because as an equation can be interpreted in the following way. In a capitalist economy, in the sense in which we now intend the capitalist economy, the market generally functions, is working smoothly, and ultimately it will reach a state of equilibrium in which each and every subject will achieve his or her own objectives. So T is the maximum possible flows of commodities achievable if the market works smoothly without any hindrance. And V is just, you see, the reflection of the customary habit of transactions when using money. Money is merely and barely a medium of exchange, that's all. So in a given society, in a given period of time, we can be taken as, you see, constant. In that way, we can infer that any variation of money, whatever it be, in quantity, is transmitted proportionally to the level of prices. Now, this almost naive interpretation is what has been the core of what I call here early monetarism, which was very important just after the Second World War. It was a sort of Keynesian attack against Keynes, made by some market-centered economists, neoclassical economists, like Milton Friedman and Donald Patinkin, at the end of the 40s and the early 50s of the last century. It was the time of McCarthyism, the great, strong witch hunt against the communists, and against, even against Keynes's thought. Paul Samuelson, who was one of the great economists of last century, Nobel Prize, when he wrote his widespread adopted book, Economics, for undergraduate students, he found it very difficult to insert Keynes's model in his book, because the critique, let's say, by McCarthy. So Samuelson was bound to invent the so-called neoclassical synthesis, in which Keynes was, in a sense, inserted some way rightly, in some sense wrongly, into the mainstream economics. So the early monetarism was a sort of strong critique of Keynesian model, because Keynes was attacking the quantity theory of money. But the monetarism still survived, I dare say, even today somehow. It's survived later in the 70s, in the 80s. I called roughly late monetarism, in a chameleonic way, in a sense, but still remain the very fact that money, as we look at the equation, money by the neoclassical economists is still seen as a sort of veil, something which is neutral, something which is a sort of hindrance in the real working of the system. Because the market is the institution which perfectly does its work. So money is something which is extraneous. It's outside the model. The real model is what really counts. And a sort of other form, in a disguised form of monetarism, is still present in models called the rational expectations model, in which the neutrality hypothesis is still present. Each individual is perfectly rational. So he knows the model. So he can anticipate everything that happens by the monetary authority. So it is, if money can be disturbing something just because monetary authority is disturbing in a way unpredictable. Now, the general equilibrium models, the neoclassical, the core of neoclassical thought, is embedded in a class of models. There are a variety, quite too many, of general equilibrium models, in which the core is that if we have as many sectors, so disaggregated models, the equilibrium condition is concisely that each quantity demanded must be equal to the quantity supplied. This must happen simultaneously in each and every commodity market. But what happens in a macroeconomic models when we aggregate sectors? So at the end, you see, we can see the conditions concisely expressed by the equality between the total investment and total saving, of course, thinking of a closed economy, and with the state, of course, left apart. And we can understand just on site, at sight, why total investment must be equal to total saving. Because you see, from the side of production, we have the production of consumption goods and means of production, investment. From the side, but the production is equal to income. And income can be devoted to buy consumption goods and save. So the condition is the one that equality, total saving equal total investment. But the point is, while in the first class of models, the disaggregated models, we have explicitly the condition of equilibrium, quantity demanded equal quantity supplied in each and every commodity market. And we know that the mechanism of demand and supply ultimately, they say, brought to the equilibrium state. In a macroeconomic model, what is the mechanism which make investment equal saving? Now we have very wrong answers, which are due not for logical or other reason or technical reasons. I suspect, because it's obvious what I'm about to say, that there must be something else, some ideological hindrance for neoclassical, mainstream economists not to understand some logical truth. So, in this way, we have the entering of the banking system, and we have a few questions still open, in a sense. Money is exogenous or endogenous? What are the relations between bank loans and bank deposits? What is the relation? What bring to equality total investment to total saving? What are the specificity and the power of the banking system? Now, total saving and total investment are not independent quantity, although apparently made by different people, but investment is what creates income. And from income, there is the generation of saving. So investment precedes saving. They are not autonomous. So there cannot be a market mechanism bringing about the equality between total investment and total saving. Because the funds for investment is not like potatoes. So, and they are not scarce. There is no scarcity. Why is that? Because the banking system, with a stroke of pen, create money. Money comes out of nothing. And we cannot have deposits before having loans, because it's the banking system which create the premise for deposits. How is it possible to even an individual to deposit something which is not exist before? So the banking system is the primum movens. How is it possible that men do not understand this triviality, I dare say? So money is intrinsically endogenous, not exogenous. If we go straight away to the quantity theory of money, here every monetarist economist would say that money is is neutral, is an exogenous entity, quantity. So the banking system has its own specificity. It's not a firm like any other. It's not producing the banking system potatoes, grain, or any kind of other services. But the banking system produces money, credit, enters directly into the relationship between debtors and creditors. Is the ancient temple in a new form, in a modern guise. Before we have, you see, the individual debtor and the individual creditor, you see, sign the contract in front of a priest, perhaps. Now the priests are the banking system, are the central bank, which is the bank of the banks, of course. And so the banking system has a particular important power. So money is strictly connected with power. And not only this, as we can see now. And this brings us straight to speculation. Why? Because if we have a debt credit contracts, we have time which enters fundamentally in a characteristic way in men's relationships. Speculation can enter in two ways. This is two definitions of, let's say, good speculation. Speculation is a normal, generally speaking, normal activity, which can help price fluctuations smoothing. Financial speculation very easily and plainly means buying, holding, selling stocks, bonds, commodities, or any valuable financial instrument to profit from fluctuation in its price. We have also commercial speculation, because you see, a trader may hedge, make a sort of insurance by selling now a commodity to a speculator in a forward future market for future delivery at a current determined price. In the fair, you see that the price, you see, can be too high, and vice versa for the individual who makes his own insurance by hedging, by buying now for future delivery. But speculation can be also two kinds quite different, physiological and pathological. And I dare say that pathological speculation is the most important one. Is the speculation which, especially over the last century and up to now, has been deeply characterizing the money and financial markets. Because, as I said before, physiological speculation can be beneficial to markets in the sense I explained before, whereas pathological speculation generally is highly dangerous. And what is the theoretical seed of dangerous speculation? I just singled out just three sources. The one is the Modigliani-Miller theorem, which at that time was seen as a sort of incredible theorem, very nice. The market value of a corporation, I read the essence of the theorem, does not depend on its financial structure. It does not depend on its debt-asset ratio. And as a consequence, using internal funds for increasing capital stock, so for making, you see, real productive investment, is indifferent in distributing dividends to shareholders. It's quite peculiar that there are two remarks in the all the people quoted there, Modigliani, Miller, Fama, Schultz, Fisher Black was there, unfortunately, had the Nobel Prizes in economics. The other remark is that Modigliani-Miller theorem, quite surprisingly, was heavily criticized by one of the people of the capital theory debate, Luigi Pasinetti. Pasinetti with Garegnani were the men who, far more than others, has extended Sraffa's model of production of commodities by means of commodities. So essentially they were devoted, both of them were devoted to in works on Sraffa's economics, let's say. But Pasinetti devoted a long article in criticizing, quite recently, the Modigliani-Miller theorem. Because you see, if you read with what happened recently, the financial market, it contains some germs, let me say this expression, contain some criminogenic seeds, very dangerous seed for the working of the system. Fama goes on, in which you see the core on mainstream economics, the market-centered ideology. What counts is only the market, the God. Fama say that markets are efficient if they are, you see, free of any hindrance. Efficient in which sense? That the prices of everything conveys full information. So the set of prices, of market price, not only adjust the plans of consumers and entrepreneurs at the best, by making their plans to be fulfilled completely, optimally. But the set of market prices conveys all the necessary and sufficient information to behave in the economy. Fisher Black and Myron Schultz went even further. They elaborated a very complex and mathematical model predicting the course of future price changes to speculate, to gain better on gains and losses. And with Merton, another economist, they got Schultz and Merton in 1997. The date is crucially important. The Nobel Prize for having elaborated so finally a mathematical method to predict the course of the events in the financial markets. What happened? What happened was that Schultz and Merton were one of the most important members of a team of a hedge fund called long-term capital management, making a huge amount of profits. They were able to distribute since the middle 90s of the last century until 1998, rate of returns up to 40%. In terms of Modigliani-Miller theorem, they played like children with the high leverage ratio, which means that they used a huge amount of debts Where did they take money, these funds? From the banking sector, of course, because the banking sector, in front of 40% of rate of return, it was for them a sort of, you see, tasty tints. So a huge amount of funds were devoted to speculation, the pathological speculation. What happened? That in 1998, the long-term capital management collapsed. It was a catastrophe. The Fed, the central bank of the United States of America, were compelled in one night to make a sort of assembly of many central state banks in the United States to bail out this criminal hedge fund from catastrophe. It would have been a catastrophe all over the world, because financial markets is a peculiar market. There is a transversality throughout the entire world. Financial capital, money, is not like labor, which for this resource, labor, it's very difficult to migrate from one town to another, from one country to another, from one continent to another. But the capital, the mobility of capital, especially today's, is instantaneous. It needs just an electronic pulse to transmit huge amount of money. So, the banking system, which creates money, let's say, was one of the most responsible institution, generally speaking, in the crisis of 2007, 2008, which was really very damaging all over the world. What happened was that the banking system, since they can create, you see, money with a stroke of pen, as Fisher once said, had at the time a very greedy behavior. Okay, very greedy behavior. And so the market was very able to produce financial products in a very complicated way, a sort of bundle. What happened also in the commercial speculation, the pathological speculation which happened in the commercial trading, I mean in the food market, was tremendous, because the bets were not on commodities, on any single commodities, like the physiological speculation alluded before. Was pathological because they did bet on index prices, on bundles of commodities. And if in this bundle there is some, you see, item which is toxic, because it comes out from some institution in which trust is very low up to the point to create a panic among the investors, then everything goes wrong. Even the rating agencies cannot properly value these bundle products. Because if there is at least one or two which are toxic in the sense I explained before, it's very difficult to rate the trust, the degree of confidence of that product. And ultimately, we have this recent phenomenon of the cryptocurrencies or crypto values for their potential danger, because here we do not have any issue in institution. Cryptocurrency is a pseudo money because it cannot be seen as a medium of exchange, a store of values. It's just a product of pure speculation. So highly unreliable. But it's very important because at the moment, we cannot foresee which development they can have, the cryptocurrencies. The potential danger is that they can jeopardize not only the authority of the central banks around the world, but can jeopardize their power. That is the inherent potential danger. And just to conclude, let me say, I have no time, I'm sorry, to say something about this very important topic about income distribution. The market-centered model of income distribution is completely faulty, is analytically wrong and politically misleading. Income distribution is a social phenomenon. And if we read those chapters of Das Kapital, Marx's Das Kapital, exactly those chapters, and then go straight on to that page of Zlaffer's Production of Commodities, already quoted, we have some similarity. We have, you see, the seed of a new way of conceiving how income distribution can be outlined and represented. And we see that the structure, you see, of the monetary interest rate. So everything which is monetary is very important for determining the rate of profits. The rate of profits in a particular state of the economy must be conceived uniform. And in Zlaffer's model, we see that having conceived a certain structure of production, a certain relationship between wages and profits, then ultimately production prices should be determined in that way. This is a very concise, a sort of stenography-based, I'm afraid, a presentation of a monetary theory of income distribution, but having time to develop and to argument further, it will be very interesting to do that. So, last words, may I conclude by saying that money ultimately is not only, you see, a unit of account, a store of value, a medium of exchange, but for what I said, I dare say that money should be seen as an instrument of power. And unfortunately, sometimes, if not often also, a weapon of dominance by few over the many. Thank you for listening.